Howdy, this is the fourth Aggie coming to you to talk about Source Filmmaker modeling, well, modeling for Source Filmmaker. Let's say that you don't, let's say you've never made a source model before, or you're new to modeling and you kind of want to know the direction you're going to go in and what to master before you waste so much, all the time learning one package or another package. Instead of learning every aspect of it, you just learn certain aspects of it. And your goal is to make, models for Source Filmmaker or Gary's Mod, whatever you want to do. This focuses more on Source Filmmaker, and my stuff actually implements physics models, so I guess it works for Gary's Mod as well. But this video, specifically this one, and I'll probably have more in-depth videos coming along, is giving you a high-level perspective of what goes into the process of making a model. And it's not terribly difficult, it's just tedious. And this is going to focus more on static props than on rigging and getting jiggle bones to work and everything else, because frankly, I don't know how to do that yet. There's a bunch of people who do know how to do it, but that knowledge is kind of dispersed, and as soon as I learn how to do it, I'll probably share it myself. So I know how to make static props, which what this is. And what a static prop basically is an object. This object, I can't move its legs, I can't bend it over, I can't make it look like it's a skin. It's just a prop that has basic move controls. This, on the other hand, is not a static prop. It's got bones, and you can move the legs and the wings and everything else. It's just, that's what it is. So we're working on a static prop, and we're using this bedside table as a example through here. So there are different phases, and it's kind of a linear workflow. You have to create the stuff first, then you have to prepare for compiling, then you have to compile it, and then you need to test it, and then if you want to, you can release it as well. So I'm going to cover basically the high-level overview of what you do, and then maybe, like I said, go into more detail later on. So the three most popular packages for doing this, first are Blender, then it's Max, and then it's Maya. And I personally don't do a lot of Blender anymore, so I can't help you there. There's a ton of tutorials. I do Maya. I haven't done 3ds Max since 2003, so I really don't know how to do that, but it doesn't really matter. What matters is you understand that there are a few key steps to do in this package before you can move on. You need to first model, then you have to UV map it and texture it. And you're like, well, what are all these things? What is a model? What are you doing in your modeling? Well, when you're modeling, I'm using Maya for this, you're creating this base geometry. Give me a second. You're creating this base geometry. Like, this is a table. It's got a round thing. It's got square pegs. It's a single model. I just made a model. I'm going to get rid of the texture there. And this is what it looks like as the bare model itself. Okay, well, that's great. Well, I don't want to import a gray thing into Source Filmmaker. I kind of want to look at like a table with wood and stuff. Well, that's where you have to get creative. Well, that's where it gets kind of complicated. Is you have to get to the UV space, the UV mapping. For the most part, when you're making these things, it's not going to come out exactly the way you want it to be. For me, I set it up like this. No, I didn't explain what this is. UV mapping, and this is kind of the same way in Blender and anywhere else, it's a fundamental concept of 3D, is these points right here represent these points over here. You're translating a 3D model into 2D space. So why do you want to do that? Well, I want to open this up in Photoshop. I want to export it out and open it up in Photoshop and paint on it, so I get something to the effect of this. Ignore the transparency. I done goofed in this file, and I set transparency as the file itself by accident because I was tired last night. But that's not what's important. What's important is I kind of laid out some UVs, and this is the way I wanted it. And I went into Photoshop and I painted on these UVs. That's what they're called. And I got this, and it's a 2D texture represented on a 3D object. That's what it is. And I kind of already covered this other point, is texturing, is where you take this UV snapshot. I'll go ahead and show it to you. Take this UV snapshot, which is this. You see the lines here? This is what I export out of Maya, and we'll export out of your Blender or whatever else you want to use. Is I took it and I put some textures down and I saved it out, and that became my texture. So this is my texture, and I saved it as a target file, and I brought it back into Maya, and I assigned that target file to my material, which, by the way, has to be a Fong E for the Mesa plugin, but that's still too high level. So I assigned that target file to this model, and that model now takes on that texture file. So this is where the programs kind of differentiate, and I'm not really going to get too terribly into it, but this is where you start getting it ready for compiling. Now, both these programs, you can do the same exact thing, but in Maya with Mesa, it does it all on its own if you wanted to. Like in the same program. You could do the same, everything you wanted to do in this one program. But that's besides the point of this video. So we'll just approach it from a generalist perspective, and that is you prep it for compiling, and then you compile it. So first you have to create what's called an SNB file. An SNB file is nothing more than a human-readable ASCII. Well, this is ASCII. You can read it. Now, it's not a binary file. It's a file that has a bunch of coordinates and names and links and stuff that it uses in the compiler. You don't have to mess with it right now. In fact, once you export it as SND, it doesn't really don't have to mess with it really. But you create these SND files, which are, like I said, nothing more than a text file that's SND, and it creates it. And then you have to create what's a QC file. Now, what's a QC file? A QC file is very much like a compiler code. Like let's say you took a programming class in college or whatever, or high school. Well, you've seen source code, right? It takes the source code and then you run it through a compiler, and it compiles the source code into executable. Well, that's kind of what this was doing. Is it's taking it and making it executable for SFM. So you created your SMD files, and then you create your QC file, which is basically this, your source code. And then you have to convert your textures that you made, that target we made in Photoshop, and we assigned it to our model. Well, what's important now is you have to go in there and create your folder structures, like in here. I went in, and I'll get in more detail on these individual phases later on. I said I can't really do Blender, but I can do the Maya and a little more detail on the overall like generalist perspective of it. You create your QC file, and you converted your textures to VTF and VNTs. Now, what are they? What are VNTs? What are VTFs? They are what Source uses to attach a material to your model. For instance, you got this model. Let me open it up. You've got this model, and this is already compiled for whatever, but it's looking for a file to tell it where the texture is. So it kind of sounds redundant, but that file does other things too. So when you compile it, it's looking for a VMT file, which is nothing more than human readable text. You know, this is your basic one that I made. Well, Mesa made, but it just tells you a few different things, like the color is this, base texture is this, which is actually implying a VTF, but you don't put a VTF in there, it already implies it. As long as it's in the same directory, or you fix the directory structure, whatever. There's different flags you can put on there, whatever you want to do, but that's what that is. A VTF file, if I open this, it's going to error out because it's the wrong version of VTF to open it, but it technically works. But let me see if I can find VTF edit. VTF edit, essentially what it does is it converts your target files or whatever else into an actual VTF. So you would go in there and find your target file like this, and you would, not touching the settings, doesn't really matter. I used using a raw, like my texture file was not generated right, but whatever. That was not even using a texture file. But essentially you would import your texture file that you made, and then you would export it as a, you would save as a VTF. And that's your VTF, that's your material that this VNT is referencing, which the model is then referencing as well. It's kind of weird. It's model, VNT, VTF, in that order, more or less. But yeah, you create those. You create your folder structure. So like, okay, I have in CD materials was where it's looking for the materials at. It's looking for in user mod. This is where it's defaulting to, is user mod and materials, and use CD materials, because user mod's your root directory for what it's looking for. So you CD materials. If you CD materials, it's looking for this directory right here, materials. But I don't want it right here like this, right? I want it in its own little directory. So I define it in the QC file to be models/props/ and then models/props. And I don't have to put anything after that. You know, it's just, that's just telling you the directory to put it in. And then you compile it, and that's what we'll talk about next. So you've got your VTFs, you got all your materials set up, you've got your folder directories fine, you're ready to go. Now, like I said, in Maya it does it all on its own, but most people who use Blender and other things, they use a either the model compiler application that's included with your thing you're compiling for. The like Source Filmmaker has its own little one. I have used in the past what's called GUI Studio Modeler. GUI Studio MDL. So I kind of uninstalled SFM and ruined my mod that I made for it. But you have to set up your path to the bin directory, the game info that, you know, it's kind of, this is where a lot of people have problems, where I had a lot of problems, and for the life of me, I can't remember off the top of my head how to do it right now, but I'll probably try to figure it out for a video. But you set your path, and then it's looking for SFM, and you load it in your file, QC file that you made. You find it in your directory, you know, your file system, and then you compile. And of course, it's gonna say there's, you know, whatever, but it'll do a bunch of text, and I'll show you what the text it looks like in Maya. It's using the same GUI Studio Modeler, MDL, Studio MDL, but it's just doing it within the program itself. There's a bunch of other things too. Like I said, it's an all-in package for Maya. It's amazing, but then again, if you don't have Maya, don't know how to use Maya, then it's kind of off the table for you. So just compile it, right? You did all this stuff. This is where the actual compiling starts, right? It looks at the stuff, finds game, the QDIR, all this other stuff. It does all on its own, assuming you set your paths right, and then it basically says completed, blah 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 blah. So, okay, you've compiled your model. Where is it now? It's got no errors. Well, you still need to test it. You still need to test it. So this one works, but so you to figure it out if yours worked, you would go to load model, and it defaults you to its default models folder. Now, if you just in your SMD, I keep referencing the SMD, if you so it was actually if you just leave this blank right here, right? There's no folder. Basically, what a folder is, when you designate a folder, you use a folder slash whatever, or folder slash folder slash blah 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 blah, more folders if you wanted to. But without that folder designation with a backslash, it's going to your default folder right here. So, which is your user mod models. So you would open up, say, bedside table, and it opened it up. So you've tested it. Now, a lot of people who want to go test it try to open SFM. Here's the problem with doing an SFM. The problem with SFM is it loads the model memory, and then excuse me, I sneeze. Excuse me. To make changes, you made a change to it, right? You have to completely close SFM, reload SFM, redo a Steam, everything. It's a giant waste of time, especially if you're not too sure of the model. Let's say, for instance, you notice there's the error there, the materials are not matching up, or there's a material error. Well, okay, I'm missing materials or something. By the way, to know if you're missing material, you'll see a pink and black square grid of some sort. You'll see pink and black, more or less. That means the texture is missing. Let me just see if I can show this to you. Fan fiction. Okay. Materials. I'll put it materials, models, props. Let's just rename this as blah. Because it's looking for the... I'm just going to prove a point to you. It's looking for this... okay, I broke this. Okay, here we go. So I was talking about. If it can't find the VMT file, and even if the VTF file is right, if it can't find the VMT file, it's looking for this right here. And you notice I renamed this to blob bed blah blah blah. You know, it's looking for this, which is appropriate for the VTF, but it can't find the VMT because it's expecting this and it doesn't get this. So when that happens, or you have a texture error, you're missing a VTF or VMT, you really won't know until you look in here. Because you could just be pink and purple, like, what the hell is going on? I mean, I don't know what's going on. Am I missing this or this? You know, I don't know. Or is it this the wrong name or the wrong location? You really don't know until you look in here into the model tab here. It'll tell you, okay, looking for VMT error, model attempted to load one or more VMTs it can't find. Okay. Well, I know what I did this one, so go back here, hit F5 to refresh. You're like, oh, I found this VMT. What happens if I do this on the VTF? This is actual texture, right? The texture linker, more or less, what it is, but the actual texture. And I broke it again. So I'll go back and reload it. You can do this actually in Steam. It's just easier for me to do it here. It's in the Source SDK. By the way, you have to have the Source SDK. I forgot to mention that. Yep. All right. So even still, it's like, well, the VMT can't find the VMT. Well, that's because I renamed the VMT. Okay. I derped. You saw it live. I derped. I'm trying to prove a point, and I'm doing a horrible job at it. All right. Crash. Oh, didn't work. Apparently it doesn't really matter. well, I guess I was wrong, but that doesn't really matter. It should be named the same thing anyway. Out of practice. If you're having problems, just make sure that it's named the same thing. Because it's just looking for this part of it, but yeah, I don't know. It could be that it's stored in memory just fine, and it's not showing me an error because of that. I don't know. Yeah. Okay, so you've tested it and you're like, well, okay, this works. You know, if I have flexes, which you're not going to have in static props, well, okay, these flexes work, and oh, okay, this all works. This is good. Well, then you load it up in SFM. This is where you're doing your final test, right? You're testing the materials, how they react to your lights. You know, usually you would have a scene set up where you just easily import it in and, you know, move it around. I don't know. However you want to do it. Test it out. This is your final medium. You know, this is where it's supposed to go. Is it supposed to go Gmod, test in Gmod? I don't know how to test in Gmod. I don't know where it goes. I'm not a Gmod person. But you're working SFM. We've already got the files where they need to be. We're already working on them. So at this point, you would, you'll say you've tested it, it works fine. Go ahead and render out yourself a preview image. You're going to put on DA, right? You're going to release your models. You're going to be a productive member of society and be cool, you know, because everyone wants a bedside table, right? So this is the final part of what you do for your models, assuming you're going to release them. Now, if you're not going to release them, you're done, you know. But maybe you want to back them up. Maybe you want to have your files elsewhere. Maybe you want them to be where you can just open them up again and drag them back, use a mod, something happens, whatever. So this is kind of more of those, one of those, you can do it, but you've already got it working. And I really suggest you do it. So for backup or for release, here's what we're going to do. We're going to create we're going to basically build out the folder structure and move the files over so that when the user opens the RAR archive, the archive file, zip, whatever, they can just drag the models and materials folder straight to the user mod directory, and it just propagates all those files to those folders. So how do you do that? What are we going to do? I mean, I don't know. I mean, I don't know. What do we do? Jesus. Well, first thing we do is we create a folder name. Let's call it DL herp a derp, because I am a derp. Okay, well, we know how the user mod directory works, right? You've got stuff, elements, maps, materials, blah, 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 blah. Well, we only worked with materials and models. We didn't make maps. We didn't make media and particles or scripts or nothing like that. Okay, well, we know that on the user mod directory, we'll need materials and models. Okay, well, we could be a derp, herp a derp, and drag materials and models here. Well, then you're copying every single file in those directories. You don't want to do that. That's kind of derpy. If you like derpy, well, it's just then retarded because, you know, it's an insult to derpy. Anyway, so we're going to create materials, and we're going to create a folder called models. And you're like, well, hot damn, I'm done. No, you're not. Because depending on the model that you make and where you place it, remember how we put the model in models props within the materials directory? We'll have to do the same thing here. So you already know where you put it, right? You just look at your QC file, you've got it pulled up, you've got everything ready to go. You know it needs to be models and props. Well, okay, we're already materials. Let's create a folder called models. And we create a folder called materials. Nope, we don't do that. That would be stupid. We do props. Okay, that's lovely. What do we do now? We go back over here. We're in our user mod materials folder. This is the big old OG folder of your model, right? We go back to models, props, models props, models props. Select the two things. If you have more, you have more. If not, you know, select all that are relevant. Copy and paste. All right. You're done with materials. Get back to where it says, this is your root folder. We're going to call this the root, as in, okay, I can't come up with a synonym for that. We're going to copy your models over. So we go back to user mod, Steam apps, blah, 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 user mod, models. Now, like I said, if you don't have a, over here, this is where it's designating where your model's going. Designating where your model's going. Don't have anything up here. It's going to be right here on the root directory of what it's looking for your models. So user mod / models. If not, let's say you have pony right here, right? If you have pony here, or folder name, whatever, it's called folder. What to do? You'll have to create a folder called that folder name that you called it in here, in your models folder. So many folders, so little time. So, but for simplicity's sake, let's say you already realize that fact. And you realize the fact that you put your models without this folder designation. Then you just copy and paste. And this is all you have to do, really, for the basic. Now, what I do, because I like people to actually find value in my models, is I include a template. Now, this template is something that you create if you want while you're doing the materials. So, like, if you export the UV map out, so you can work in Photoshop, well, okay, you're going to have to import it in, and then you have to create another layer for your actual texture underneath the UV layer, and then you paint your texture on that texture layer, and then when you export it as a target, you just turn off the layer for the UV map. Well, why would you want that to go to waste? So what I do is I go ahead and save that PSD. I don't get rid of it. You know, I still have to use the target for everything else, but I save this PSD, and I've got the UVs and texture there. Well, let's say, for instance, I want a darker wood. Well, okay, I select that layer, I find my new texture, and I plop it over here, and I work on it. And then when I'm ready to save as a target, you know, you just turn the UV snapshot off and you save as a target, so the program knows where these points are. If you leave them on, I don't have an example of this, but if you leave these on, they'll put the wireframe, these things, on the actual model. So you see these lines? Do you want these lines in your texture? Maybe you do, maybe you don't. But if you don't, turn the UVs off and then save. And then that's where you work off your target. Then that turns into your VTF. And by the way, you can change the VTF as many times as you want to, as long as it's the same, named the same, and put in the same location. You don't have to touch the VNT if you don't want to, as long as you don't change those settings either. But you just say you just want to make one change or whatever, you just save over that VTF. You know, I'm getting too detailed here. But anyway, back to releases. I usually give a template, and I just put the template over here. It's pretty obvious what it is. You can open up Photoshop. You don't have Photoshop? Well, I can't help you, but it's there if you want it. At this point, you're ready to package up your model. Now, I use WinRAR. If you have WinZip or whatever, you know how to. If you know how to make an archive out of a folder, most tools have this option and a right-click option. But see, this is why we made this Herpadirt folder, because this Herpadirt folder, we're gonna just right-click it and say add to dl_herpadirt.rar, and here we go. This is all you have. This is all you need to have. At this point, you can give it to anyone you want, as long as they understand that you go over here to, when you want to import them into your own source filmmaker, you just take these two folders and you drag right here, because you're not going to drag in these folders right here. You don't want to do that. You just want to, and then I've already got them. You just whatever, replace, whatever, and then there, and you just reload source filmmaker, and you've got your models. You know, so that's where it's ready for release. And I usually put, if you're going to put on DA, which is what I usually do, you can't just upload a RAR for your submission. You have to have a preview image for your RAR downloaded. And as another point I'll make, when you're setting it up to be put into a submission for DA, you have to select the category. So a lot of these categories don't allow certain file types. So you can't just go in here and go like, digital art, blah, blah, blah. You have to go to resources, stock images, 3D models, and then that's your category. That allows you to put a RAR file in there. Just another piece of information if you're trying to upload a DA. You could always upload it to Stash as well, but people are not really going to see your Stash. That Stash is your hidden stuff until you link to it. So do what you will. It's all up to you. This is magic. So we went from Maya to that. On one extra tidbit, because I know people are going to want to use Blender. I didn't touch on this. You need to drink water. I can't model in Blender. Not really. I can't really operate in Blender at all. I haven't used it in forever. But I know how to do a few things. And if you're using Blender, here's how we're going to be at, we're at phase 2 right now. We've gone back to phase 2. And I know you're watching this video and we're like, well, okay, I've already got my models and ready to go. What do we need to do? I'm using Blender. There are already tutorials out here on YouTube doing this. But I'll go ahead and go into it just because I know you're going to use Blender. You're going to need to first download a plugin called Import Export Blender Source Tools. I don't know where it's at. Google is your friend. But you get it, you install from file, you find it in your files, and my roommate's retarded. Install from file, and then you have it in your thing. Now, if you've installed it, you don't know where it's at, well, it's going to be in user, category user. Oh my dear God, these guys are retarded. And you have to enable it, and once you enable it, it'll pop up over here on your right panel. Now, okay, it doesn't look, if you don't see this because it's in something else, right? It's your third option over here, which is, I guess, the scenes. Scene, your scene panel, whatever you want to call this. It's down here in export. And you can say, I want my model, my SMD, it's an SMD export. I want my SMD to export here. And it's probably going to export as some random name. I think that's what it does, is it picks its own little random name. And you have to go rename it whenever you get it. Just so keep in mind where you're exporting it to. It's probably going to be something different than you named it. And you just rename it like a normal file rename. Right click, rename. Right click, rename. And then you're ready to go. I think you can also compile from here, but I don't know how that works. You have to link the engine path. That's a little more advanced than I think you may be ready for. There are YouTube tutorials, I'm sure, on how to do it, because Blender is a very popular program. I just, like I said, can't really work. It's not my package of choice. It's not worse than Maya. It's actually pretty good for a package, or a 3D package. Free? Oh my God, it's amazing. But I haven't used it in almost 6 or 7, 8 years actually. So I couldn't tell you how to model this thing. So your mileage may vary. Yeah, I can move it around. That's what I can do. But what's important is you can export an SMD file out. I don't really work with DMXs. I think there's advantages to DMX. I don't know what they are off the top of my head, but for what I've been doing, it's SMD. A lot of people use SMDs. So yeah, you just export the SMDs, and we go back to phase 2, step 2. You've got your SMDs. You got your SMD that you exported for your cube. In fact, I don't think I showed you that. Export, and then we're going to select. We're we're going to export this cube. So cube, export cube. I haven't configured the scene, so I haven't configured this thing right here. Documents, accept. Okay, I configured it. Well, let me do it. Yeah, okay. So that it creates that SMD. So like I said before, when I was making those SMDs for Maya, or when I was making those SMDs, where you have the SMD that it shows, you have the collision model, which is the physics one, and then you have the idle animation SMD. And because it's a static prop with no rigging, no animation, you can use the same SMD, I think, for all three of them. So I just take the SMD and I right-click, copy, paste, copy, paste, and then paste again, and then I rename them to logical, idle, and physics phi, you know, and then that goes in my QC file. Okay, so it's all there really is to it, you know. What else did I miss? I got Blender. I don't know how to do it in 3ds Max. That's kind of where it kind of started, I think, with 3ds Max. With older source games, though. So it's probably got lots of information out there for you. I know they've got a dedicated tool for it. That's about it. I'm thinking about doing walkthroughs of Maya, but I've already done what I know of Blender. I know I'm keep rambling. Blender Toots, I think is what it's called. So Blender Toots, I think, has a lot of tutorials on how to do stuff. Keep in mind what you're trying to learn. You're trying to learn how to use the interface enough to navigate it, and how to model, and how to UV do it, do the UVs. One of the most valuable skills in life, I kid you not, is using Google. I kid you not. A lot of people overlook this one fact, is Google is by far the most important skill set you can ever have as an IT person, CG person, anyone doing technical work. Google is your friend, unless you're in some strange academic field that doesn't have a lot of topics on it, but that's beside the point. But yeah, you just search on Google or YouTube or whatever for Blender tutorials for beginners and come up with something like this where they teach you how to model these. Yeah, it goes through the actual interface kind of, and then I'm looking at the preview there. You know, you got the, okay, I'm modeling a cup, and then doing more modeling. Then in phase 2, let's see what else he does. I think he's going to do the UV texturing. Probably not. Okay, he's not doing UV textures here, but he's teaching you how to model. Okay, you know, Blender modeling tutorial. You know, Blender UV texture. I'm just trying to prove the point that I'm giving you the names of the concepts you need to learn, and you can take those keywords and then search YouTube or Google, whatever you want to do, for tutorials on how to do them. Because you don't have to learn every single part of the package, right? You don't need to learn, well, back to Blender. You don't need to learn how to do kinetics. Well, I don't know. Use Blender. You don't need to know how to do lighting or rendering or sculpting or nothing. You don't have to do any of that. You just need to know how to model and UV texture, UV map. These two things. That's it. Once you've UV mapped and UV mapped and modeled, and you've taken that UV map that you've exported out into whatever, you've got your you're done. You're done with the thing for static props. I mean, yeah, when you get more advanced, you'll need to know how to add, a bone, right? I mean, you go out there and you add a skeleton, right? Joint tool, blah. Um, you know, I'm not gonna sit here and spend time wasting your time any more than I have to. But you add bones and skins, and that's for more advanced topics. Right now, you're just learning how to do static props. So I'm going to close this tutorial off. I've done this about 3 times now, and I'm looking at a few hours in. But I hope this is beneficial to you. Like I said, it's a high-level overview of the process. How you choose to do it is up to you. You want to go the free route, the paid route, the more, not really intricate, but more hodgepodge, I guess is a good way of putting it. Or do you want to use a tool that has a plugin that, once configured right, is a one-stop shop? I mean, I'm not trying to sell it, but you pick your workflow, and this is the workflow. So anyway, it's been a pleasure talking to you guys. I'm sorry if I bored you, but I thought that since I've been modeling recently, I'd put out something that I haven't really seen very much of in at least our community, which is the Pony SFM community. Now, this is geared towards anyone trying to do source models for SFM, but specifically the Pony SFM community. So thank you very much, and goodbye.